What is the scariest, most bone-chilling moment you have ever witnessed or have been told in your life? I was watching this as an interested neighbor. Tree fell in my neighbor's yard down a steep hill. It was a huge tree 5 feet wide, 70 feet tall. Crane was pulling up on a piece of it, while a grunt worker was chainsawing the piece being pulled by the crane to separate it. The crane cable tension was tight on the piece he was cutting, so when the worker cut through enough of it, the cable ripped half of it up the hill and the worker's chainsaw went straight up into his head. I'll never forget him trying to walk a few steps and pull it out before he fell over dead with the saw still humming away. My father is a physician, has been in practice for 30 years, and has literally seen tens of thousands of patients. One day a few years back he goes to see a woman who has been admitted to the hospital the previous day for a serious lung condition. He enters her hospital room in the morning. The woman is heavily sedated, and there is a nurse fixing her bed and cleaning the room. Immediately upon entering, my father gets a severe allergic reaction, feels he can barely breathe, and tears start rolling from his eyes. The nurse stands and helps him back into the hallway. After Dad finally recovers and apologizes to the nurse, says that's so weird, that only happens when I get close to cats. The nurse goes white as a ghost. It turns out that the hospitalized woman had been awake all night, screaming that cats were crawling all over her body and trying to scratch out her eyes. The hospital staff believed she was simply having a weird reaction to some medication, and after hours of her terrified screaming they were able to medicate her to sleep. There is probably a logical explanation for the whole situation, but I remember finding the account bone-chilling when I first heard the story. Scariest moment, I was about 16 or so, and on my way to help decorate for a school dance. A buddy and me decide to go get some snacks and drinks for everyone, and he's driving his hatchback Camaro, 90s model. About halfway down the road, while heading back with the snacks, we are coming around a fairly sharp right curve, and halfway through the curve a truck comes blasting toward us half on our side of the road. My friend swerves and overcorrects a few times until we are heading semi-straight on the road, not realizing we are still sliding a bit toward the ditch. He tries to save it, and we hit the ditch on the driver's side, still moving fairly quickly. The last thing I remember before blacking out was us in midair careening into the ditch. The car was mangled and upside down facing the opposite direction we were heading, and both of us are hanging upside down in out seats. He's still unconscious and his head is tilted sideways against the roof. I had to crawl through the broken window on the back hatch because the doors were crushed. There was a man standing across the road who just happened to live right across from where we crashed. He said we hit the ditch, flipped, and the top of the car was crushed on a tree before rolling back down into the ditch upside down. I had a mild concussion and he cracked a bone in his neck, but wasn't paralyzed. We were lucky as hell. I still get nervous when riding as a passenger. Most bone chilling, the day I had to use all the training in CPR I never imagined I'd ever need. Working at a grocery store, I heard a woman screaming about something in one of the aisles. Another woman comes running toward the front, panicked and asking if anyone knew CPR as some guy collapsed and wasn't breathing. I closed my lane with people still in the line and met a pharmacist who works there halfway to the guy. The two of us were the only ones who were trained in CPR, and we worked for about 30 minutes, switching out every few minutes when one of us got exhausted. A lady came back a few days later to the shop and told us she was a relative of his and that he didn't make it, but thanked us for trying so hard to keep him alive until the paramedics got there. I still remember it like it's fresh in my mind. My whole family is firefighters, and I know my dad's darkest day. It was an auto accident where 2 young children were killed that were the same age as my sister and myself. My uncle's top, or former top, is just like your family friends. They get a call for a structure fire about a mile from the station. They pull up, begin stretching hose, and a man comes running out with a little girl. He then runs back, and as they are screaming at him to stop, his other daughter was inside. Next thing you know, a small bathroom window is broken, and through it are 2 outstretched arms with a small child. Firefighter grabs it, but the dad is too big to fit through the window, so he tries to run back through the house. At that point a flashover happens as he hit the front door and is blown out into the yard on fire. He gets up and runs around as they are trying to put out a burning man. He is loaded into the ambulance and taken to the hospital where he dies. This was in the mid-80s and my uncle was at most 23 or 24. He organized a donation drive for the wife and kids and made it his obsession, where he was asked to take a little time off. He eventually sought help and was able to harness his feelings. I never thought I would share this story with total strangers, but here goes. So my mother, sister and I lived in a small apartment. An important thing to note is that my mother was a psychiatrist. She lost her license for attempting to kill a patient, so she had a very large collection of painkillers, psychedelics and more. So it was my sister's 13th birthday party and my mother decided to down an entire bottle of cough syrup, enough vodka to kill most people, and probably something else. It gets to be about 11 at night and my sister started making plans for her and her friends to sleep in the living room. At this point my mother starts trying to hit on some of her friends and demands to sleep right next to them. My sister says no and gets slapped across the face so hard I could hear it clear through my bedroom door. Next thing I know, my sister has grabbed the phone telling me to call the cops and my father while she starts barricading my door with her body. I will burn this whole house down if I have to, get screamed at us as my mother breaks my door with a large knife in her hand. All I had time to do was tell the cops we needed police at our address before she points the knife at me or tells me to give her the phone. My sister then grabs the phone screaming for help as my mother grabs her by the throat and picks her up and presses her against my window. Lucky for us, the police station was about a 5 minutes walk from our home, so the cops were there after about 10 minutes of our little bedroom standoff. As soon as we saw the cops lights out the window, my mom dropped my sister and sealed herself off in her room. I have never been able to forget the look in her eyes as she pointed the knife at me. It still gives me nightmares years later. I would say we got a happy ending, but my dad was about the same as my mom, so my sister and I got split up and we both ended up homeless. I found some very good friends I now call family to take me in, but my sister was not so lucky. I have not seen her in about a year now because her husband is abusing her, even though she says he is perfect. TLDR, drugs are bad, and don't try to kill or even threaten your kids. Thank you for taking the time to read all this. When I was about 12, my sibling broke down and told my mother that they had been touched by our grandfather. This was late at night and me, my siblings and my mom pretty much cried in a pile all night. It was one of the worst nights of my life. The next day we stay home from school, but my mom still needed to go to work. No dad. We lived in an apartment that was semi-underground and the windows on one side of the house were pretty much on the ground outside. We hear a knock and my grandpa's voice asking us to let him. We were terrified and we ran to close all the blinds and lock the back door. He was an exceptional manipulator and he put on his sweetest, saddest grandpa voice and starts knocking on all the windows pleading with us to let him in. None of us are saying anything and we are hiding. We call our mom and whisper that grandpa's here and he's trying to get inside the house. He tries opening the door and when it was locked he started to get really angry. He quite shouted how could we do this to him and how he just loves us and nothing is wrong. He left after about 10 minutes, but it felt like hours. My mom rushed home as fast as she possibly could. I forget if it was the same next day or a while later, but his and my grandma's house was searched by cops. They found he had set up a tube to go from a closet in his study. He would never let anyone else go in his study to the bathroom, and he'd been watching us go to the bathroom and shower for I don't know how long. Good news is he did go to prison. A whole 3 years. We have to see him at family gatherings, like funerals, and it makes my skin crawl. I've been mugged at gunpoint and almost kidnapped in Mexico by a gang of murderers fleeing America, 13 then, and my formerly sweet old grandpa trying to get at us kids for God knows why, is the most terrified I've ever been in my life. Edit. I really appreciate the kind words towards me and the hateful words towards my grandfather. Lol. I'll answer some questions and tell more about the whole Mexico scenario. First, yes, we really do have to see him at family gatherings. We used to have a restraining order, but it has been a long time and I don't think it still works. I honestly don't know much about it since it was put on when I was so young. The types of gatherings were a desperately sick relative or a funeral, so we really couldn't just ask him not to be there. We never talked to him, and he hasn't tried to talk to us, though we've never given him the chance. Second, my family is terrible. All but 4 family members sided with grandpa. He seriously is a master manipulator and has had them in the palm of his hand for years, and they still hang out with him and have him for dinner and spend Christmas with him. It truly makes me sick. Oh, and no, we were not pleased with 3 years. That was a slap in the face. He would be out while we were still kids, and it terrified us knowing he was out, probably incredibly angry at us, and we still lived in the same place, so he could easily find us. I've been mugged at gunpoint and almost kidnapped in Mexico by a gang of murderers fleeing America, 13 then, and my formerly sweet old grandpa trying to get at us kids for God knows why, is the most terrified I've ever been in my life. Edit. I really appreciate the kind words towards me and the hateful words towards my grandfather. Lol, I'll answer some questions and tell more about the whole Mexico scenario. First, yes, we really do have to see him at family gatherings. We used to have a restraining order, but it has been a long time and I don't think it still works. I honestly don't know much about it, since it was put on when I was so young. The types of gatherings were a desperately sick relative or a funeral, so we really couldn't just ask him not to be there. We never talked to him, and he hasn't tried to talk to us, though we've never given him the chance. Second, my family is terrible. All but 4 family members sided with grandpa. He seriously is a master manipulator and has had them in the palm of his hand for years, and they still hang out with him and have him for dinner and spend Christmas with him. It truly makes me sick. Oh, and no, we were not pleased with 3 years. That was a slap in the face. He would be out while we were still kids, and it terrified us knowing he was out, probably incredibly angry at us, and we still lived in the same place, so he could easily find us.